We are, in fact, prohibited from going a certain distance when you're owned by Warner Brothers, and which I assure you they do own us. But our executive producer of The Closer, I told him where I needed to go and what I needed to do, and they're very, our guys are very cool. And I don't want to embarrass Bud, but I told Bud what happened, and he said, you're going to do what? And I said, well, I was going to read from a book, a new book, a collection of stuff by Bud Shrake. Bud Shrake? Little Red Book, Bud Shrake? I said, that's the Bud Shrake. He said, you know Bud Shrake? I said, I'm proud to say that I do. And so the only way I got to come is Bud has to autograph a couple of Little Red Books that Mike Abbott, because I had locked my keys in my car, Mike Abbott was kind enough to go pick up at the bookstore. So, but they are for, if you watch the credits, it's for Mike Robin, who happens to be a scratch golfer. And I swear I thought he was going to tear up when I told him I'd get an autograph. Well, we're about to see why people love this man so much and his words. Cops eat kid's pet. Texas Observer, July 25th, 1975. This is Bud's intro. It was a dirty old building with exhaust fans that blew clouds of black soot on hot summer days in a time when reporters wore white shirts and neckties. Prostitutes worked the narrow alley between the press and a ramshackle hotel called the New Gym, where Delbert McClinton was playing in a black jazz club as a white boy, barely 12 years old. On Saturday nights, printers in the back shop of the paper would peer across the alley and into the open windows of the bedrooms on the second floor of the New Gym, where romance was usually in the air. Nearly every hotel south of 10th Street was a walk-up whorehouse, bookies with names like Circus Face, Little Mac, and Puny the Stroller operated openly out of bars where it was illegal to serve a mixed drink. So, if you stopped in for a drink, you brought a whole bottle in a brown paper bag. There were so many slot machines and pinball machines that gangsters from Dallas tried to move in and take over, setting off a war of shootings, strangulations, car bombings, bombs planted in mailboxes and under telephones, and even bombs dropped from Piper Cubs. Preachers and civic leaders accused us of tabloid excesses in the vivid stories we published at our dingy domain at 5th and Jones Street in Fort Worth. But the fact is, we didn't tell half of it. The article. I never saw the books, but I never doubted that the Fort Worth press was on the downside of broke. They told us that every day. You had to turn in an old stub to get a new pencil. Sometimes you would go to the back for more copy paper to write stories on and find stacks of it cut into the shape of pennants, reject stuff. But if you rolled the paper into the typewriter with the pointy side up, it taught you to write a quick, crisp, Scripps Howard-style first paragraph. Preferably no more than 4 short words like, "Help," cried the Queen. The pyramid idea of how to write a news story, punching it at the top and broadening it as you went down, became for us as much an obligation as a device. But those things made us search for glamour in the dirt and outright stinginess of the place. And we worked to produce stories that were in their own class great. By that I mean news stories that were ingenious and diligent pieces of reporting with a fair amount of accuracy under the conditions. Even stories that were dull, like and ordinary, except to the victims, like traffic fatalities. One could occasionally turn into a front page lead for the street edition with a headline that said, "Blind Evangelist Mourns Hit and Run Baby." Some of the stories we did could hardly be justified except as tabloid show business. I interviewed a woman who had raised a 7-foot hollyhock and detoured this event into a whole press page of creepy fiction. One Saturday night, on the police desk, I was called by the city editor, Mac Williams, bless him, whose notion of the perfect lead would have been, "Jesus wept." If you could just cut out one word in there someplace. And told to go out on the north side and talk a woman out of killing herself. She had phoned up the paper, as do a lot of lonely people, and laid her tale on Mac. For me to go to the north side meant leaving the police beat open for a couple of hours, and I argued. And I went. Down a dirt road was a little frame house with 3 junk cars in the yard. I knocked on the door. A dog crashed through the screen and bit a rip in my pants. In those days, we wore suits and ties and snap-brim hats on the police beat as to pass for detectives. And I kicked that dog about 18 feet through the living room into the kitchen, where the dog slammed his head against the refrigerator and commenced howling. An old man with a shotgun stumbled out of the bedroom and said, "That's the one that wants to kill herself over there. It's not Spot that he wants to die." On the couch, a woman lay in the heap of gin bottles. I nudged her and asked if she wanted to kill herself. "Bet your goddamn ass," she said, and went back to sleep. "Nearly every Saturday night she says that," explained the old man. I drove to a gas station and phoned Mac and said if the woman killed herself, I would hear about it back at the police beat, where as it happened, I should have been reporting about a local gangster who had just been blown up with a bomb. Sunday morning, I picked up the paper and saw my byline with a big headline on it that said, "I saved her from sure death." We were trying to sell newspapers, and there was a theory that that was how it was done, although that theory seems not to have proved out in Fort Worth. If there wasn't a tornado, we could dress up with a big front page headline, never mind that the tornado was in Oklahoma, and we could find a banger of a first-person story that was supposed to grab people at the news rack on their way out of the office, the Press being an afternoon paper 5 days a week. Or we would twist a small event into an ajacorama, like when a policeman ran over a deer in Trinity Park. Not knowing what else to do, brought the carcass down to the station, where the deer was slaughtered and handed out as venison. The policeman didn't know who the deer belonged to. But anyhow, it appeared in the press as "Cops Eat Kids' Pet." Letter, April 10th, 1963, from the Naval of Mother Europe to Dr. Billy Lee Brammer, Senor J.D.L. Milner. Dear El Senor and Mr. Doctor, I finished my new book, But Not for Love, the other day and got the last part of the manuscript off to New York so they can start printing up hundreds of thousands of them. And then I decided I better start on another one so the devil couldn't slip into my idle workshop. You know how I feel about the devil. I've read in the papers where the Anglicans are doing away with hell, which should make us all feel a lot better. But they may not get it done before all my ailments fetch me over the brink. And I want to keep the devil at a standoff. Anyhow, work is the way to do it. And as Paul Gallico told me down in Antibes, if you're going to work, you ought to make money. First thing I want to tell you about is my visit to Gallico. I just come from Rome, where them Italians breathed all over me and gave me a terrible case of the paranoia, and a middling case of the angst, and also a rattly cough, and it was raining when I got to Nice. I checked into a hotel near the railroad station and phoned Gallico, as I had been instructed to do, via a letter from Gallico, who wrote at the urging of Ken McCormick and Adela Rogers St. John's. So I phoned him, and he couldn't remember who I was and put me off. That didn't bother me a hell of a lot, and I didn't blame him, and I forgot it. Early the next morning, he called me and apologized and said, "Oh, now I remember, and can you come for lunch?" I did, on the electric train that goes up and down between Monte Carlo and Cannes. Gallico has a 16th century house in Antibes, right on the water. There's a big horseshoe bay from his living room, and the balcony on the 3rd floor you can see across the blue water all the way to Monte Carlo, with Nice about midway, and the old forts and fishing boats and mountains. You can see even past Monte Carlo and see the snow peaks of the Italian Alps. From the other side of the house, you can see Capri and Tibby's and the villas. I was thinking what a great house it would be to have a party in and how we could wreck it in one night. Gallico is a big guy, a little bigger than El Señor Milner, and looks younger than he is. He must be 60 or so, but his hair is still full and brown, and he looks 40. A tall woman with an expression of smelling something bad came in and stuck out her hand. "This is the Baroness of Liechtenstein," said Gallico. I didn't know whether to kiss her hand or bite off her finger. But she grabbed me and gave me one of those quick, hard pumps that the Europeans use for a handshake. Gallico lives with the Baroness, or maybe it's vice versa. And she can't get a divorce from the Baron, but they get on swell. We all sat down to talk and had a big lunch with wine served by servants. Gallico dictates everything to a secretary who then types it on an electric machine big as a phonograph. He said he used to type until a few years ago he got a pinched nerve and couldn't use his hands. "You better learn to dictate because bending over a typewriter will give you a pinched nerve," he said. Gallico likes to talk. He asked me if my book could be serialized in post, and I said no. He asked why, and I said because it is smutty. He looked a little irritated. I had dosed up on heart medicine and had a hard time keeping up from interrupting him and making several speeches of my own. I wanted to tell him that we didn't look at things the same way a bit, but I manfully kept fairly quiet and ate his roast pork and drank his wine and listened. Then he and the Baroness drove me back to Nice. He said he was in Dallas a few years ago to do a Rediscovering America series for Reader's Digest. He said Dallas was great. I said it was in danger of being very crappy. We said farewell, but he was, through all of it, very nice, gentlemanly, much more so probably than I would have been if I was having my day wasted by someone I didn't know. As I sat in Rome, them Italians had given me a terrible case of the paranoia, and then I went on to Barcelona, and it didn't get much better. So I went to Paris. I fell in love with 4 identical midgets and got passing out drunk on Fumador, which cost 99 cents a quart in Barcelona, and wandered the streets yelling like a madman and got Billy Lee's letter. Billy Lee had a suspicion that I had sneaked some literary talk into a letter to him, and he was right. It was the result of the symptom of oncoming paranoia, which the Italians finally give me. I got some blessed medals, which I am bringing you. Medals of St. Jude, the saint of hopeless causes, who should be the patron of all of us. I have worn a Jude for years. Joyce spotted the hopeless cause in me long ago. Now I've got some blessed ones for all of you. Rub them when your child support is due, or when you realize it's 6 a.m., when you start to work, or when you're out of heart medicine, or on hundreds of other occasions. You still get screwed, but you survive. My book came out 466 pages of MS, and I did it in 52 working days. There were 20 other days during the interim from start to finish when I didn't do a damn thing, mostly in Rome. And even if it's not worth a shit, that was a lot of work for me to have did. I am proud that I did all that work while I was busy falling in love, especially with the 4 identical midgets. I got to looking through the carbon, and it nearly made me throw up. But anyhow, Doubleday is going to publish it in the end of October, and we can have a mass throwing up. One big trouble was, I noticed there's no Indians in it. That's the thing about heart medicine. Here I was going along furiously and finishing, and then I found out I'd left out the Indians. What kind of goddamn book is that without Indians? I will lose my reputation that was so dearly earned and so cherished. But I have lost other stuff. I am rubbing Jude.